Thanks for joining us today. I'm Cody Holyoke. We start our broadcast with a story about a young girl who just finished the school year with a lesson she will likely spend her entire life reliving over and over again. Her name's Mia. She's 11 years old, and instead of being able to spend the summer with her friends, she's mourning them. You see, Mia was in the classroom at Robb Elementary School in Uvalde, Texas last month, the day a teenage gunman murdered 19 of her friends and 2 teachers. Mia, fearing for her life, told reporters she used her dead teacher's phone to call 911, covering herself with a friend's blood, pretending to be dead while waiting for help to arrive. Mia went to Washington this past week to urge congressional lawmakers to work together to save lives.
Do you feel safe at school? Why not?
Because I don't want it to happen again.
And you think it's going to happen again?
Mia and her dad, also family members of some of the Uvalde victims, implored lawmakers to act. Some have listened, working with politicians across the aisle to strike a deal on common sense gun control measures at the urging of the president.
Let's meet the moment. Let us finally do something.
Earlier this month, President Biden laid out a list of measures he'd like to see to curb gun violence, focusing on assault weapons, background checks, red flag laws, and addressing the mental health crisis. The House made some of those moves this past week, passing a bill that raises the age limit for purchasing a semi-automatic rifle from 18 to 21. It also bans the sale of high-capacity magazines capable of holding more than 15 rounds of ammo. But the measure passed largely along party lines and now heads to the U.S. Senate, where it is expected to fail. We'll be watching for any major movement from Capitol Hill. But, you know, we've done that before, haven't we? Watched after Sandy Hook, after Parkland, and now after Uvalde. So with federal changes still being hammered out, what's happening here at home? You know, there aren't really too many restrictions on firearms in our 2 states. In Missouri, a fairly new law called the Second Amendment Preservation Act actually punishes law enforcement officers for enforcing federal gun laws with hefty fines or even jail time. It's a move several groups are challenging right now. There are no set waiting periods for gun purchases in Missouri, and anyone 19 or older can carry a concealed firearm without a permit. In Kansas, you have to be 21 to do that, but there's no waiting period for purchases, and minors in Kansas can buy guns with barrels longer than 12 inches. Governor Laura Kelly, a Democrat, doesn't want gun bans, but does echo some of the president's proposals.
I think it's become very clear that some very common sense, thoughtful gun sense regulations need to be in place.
The question is, will state legislatures in Kansas and Missouri, 2 red states, make any changes to tighten gun restrictions? History speaks to the contrary. Here to explain and get to the heart of this matter is Alan Rostron, law professor with UMKC. Alan, welcome back. We know a lot of this has to do with politics, which we'll discuss later on in our broadcast. But suffice it to say, Republican legislatures run the show in Jeff City and Topeka. Missouri has a Republican governor who boasted on Twitter a couple years back that he was proud to have the highest rating from the NRA's Political Victory Fund. Lawmakers in both states seem to be fairly supportive of gun access and averse to restrictions. Is that fair to say?
Yes, that's correct. Obviously, guns are an issue that has divided the country for quite a long time, and it runs very much along political lines. And also others like the urban versus rural. People are going to have different attitudes toward it. But Missouri and Kansas are both states where you have, pretty significant political majorities that would favor the gun rights side of the issue more than the gun control side of it. And the legislative activity in recent decades would reflect that very much.
As of right now, we know no special sessions have been called in either state to tackle the issue. Have there been any efforts to tighten gun restrictions in our 2 states? If not, why do you think that is?
There are bills proposed from time to time on both sides of the issue. So some bills are introduced that would tighten gun laws in some ways, but they don't really have a chance of being enacted. The significant changes have occurred, in each state over the years, over the last couple decades. One, to allow people to carry guns concealed in a way that wasn't previously legal. The enacted stand your ground laws to let people defend themselves in some situations where they previously couldn't. And they both enacted Second Amendment preservation or protection acts. But so those are the kind of legislation that get enacted. They're things that are on the gun rights side of the issue rather than things that would be tightening or adding new restrictions that didn't previously exist.
Sure. Do you think Uvalde changes this at all? I mean, we just heard from Governor Laura Kelly, who says she's in favor of some measures like stronger background checks, red flag laws, that sort of thing.
I don't think it changes it significantly at either the state level here in our area or at the national level. There will certainly bring a new round of discussion of these issues, and it's at least possible, again, either from Congress or perhaps from one of the state legislatures, there could be some limited action taken. Congress, for example, is talking about these red flag laws, the idea of trying to better limit access to guns for people who've been shown to have a mental issue and perhaps be dangerous. But it'll be limited whatever gets enacted at the national level. And I just don't really foresee anything changing at the state level here in Missouri or Kansas.
Sure. One question we get a lot, and I know you've heard too, why can't local governments do something? We know Kansas City has sued gun manufacturers before, but can local leaders, enact new measures to ban certain weapons?
People often mention that because, there are differences of opinion, in Kansas City, for example, or in St. Louis. These are cities where government officials and the public would strongly favor stricter gun laws. And the reason they can't do anything is that several decades ago, there was a wave of legislation enacted in many states, including Missouri and Kansas, that preempted local governments from regulating guns in any way. So in other words, they said this is going to be something that the state will handle at the state legislative level, and it's not something that local governments can do anything about. It was a recognition of the fact that the issue there are a lot of states where opinions might differ. In the big cities like Atlanta would feel differently about guns than the state of Georgia as a whole, or New Orleans would feel differently than the state of Louisiana as a whole. And so the state officials don't want local officials to be able to really weigh in on these issues.
Sure. It's important to note we could have a U.S. Supreme Court decision coming down soon that may affect decisions made on gun restrictions and who can carry firearms in public. Tell us about that.
The Supreme Court has a case from New York. New York is obviously a state that's sort of unlike Missouri and Kansas. It's in the other direction. It has somewhat more restrictive gun laws. And so there in New York, you can get a license or permit to carry a concealed firearm, but you have to show some particular reason. It can't just be like in Missouri and Kansas, where if you're legally qualified, then it's up to you. In New York, they say you must have some reason other than just the general reasons that anyone might have. You have to show some special particular reason. And that's been challenged as a violation of the right to keep bear arms under the Constitution. And the Supreme Court seems very likely, just given its current makeup, to rule in favor of the challengers and to strike down this New York law. So the big question is, how far will they go? Will they make just a sort of a narrow ruling on that particular issue, or will they say things that really signal that other gun laws might be likely to be struck down in the future?
A lot to think about. Alan Rostrom with UMKC, thanks for your time today. To stay on top of the debate over gun safety and any new changes or restrictions, look for updates on air and online at KMBC.com.